In the vast chronicles of the Sith Order, there exist names that echo through millennia. Darth Sidious, who orchestrated the fall of the Republic. Darth Vader, the Chosen One turned dark. Darth Bane, who reshaped the very foundation of Sith philosophy. But among these legendary figures, one name stands apart, whispered with a mixture of fascination and revulsion even by other Sith lords. A name that was deliberately erased from both Jedi and Sith records, deemed too dangerous, too extreme, too heretical to be remembered. That name is Darth Momin. This is not a story of galactic conquest or revenge against the Jedi. Momin cared nothing for such pedestrian ambitions. His tale is far more unsettling than simple power-hungry Sith lords seeking to dominate the galaxy. Momin sought something far more disturbing. He wanted to create art for the dark side itself, to freeze moments of pure terror in time eternal, to transform suffering into immortal monuments of darkness. His philosophy was so extreme that even the Sith, practitioners of the dark arts who reveled in pain and domination, considered him a heretic and tried to erase all knowledge of his existence. Before we can understand the full horror of what Momin became, we must journey back to a time period rarely explored in the Star Wars galaxy, the era between 1100 years and 1000 years before the Battle of Yavin. This was a crucial period in galactic history, situated just before Darth Bane would establish the rule of two that would define the Sith for the next millennium. During this time, the Sith still operated in greater numbers, engaged in endless conflicts with the Jedi Order. It was an age of darkness and war, when Force wielders on both sides battled across countless worlds, and it was into this violent era that a being named Momin was born. Understanding Momin's story requires understanding that he was different from the very beginning. While we will explore his heretical philosophies and grotesque creations in detail, what makes Momin truly unique in Sith history is that he viewed the dark side not as a tool for power, but as an audience. Where other Sith sought to dominate through fear, Momin sought to create monuments to fear itself. Where others wanted to rule, Momin wanted to sculpt. His was not the path of the warrior or the schemer, but of the artist whose medium was horror, whose canvas was flesh and bone, whose masterpiece would require an entire city's worth of screaming souls frozen in their moment of ultimate terror. Tonight, we will trace Momin's complete journey, from a disturbed child conducting dark experiments to his training under the mysterious Sith Lady Darth Shah, through his murder of his own master and rejection of traditional Sith hierarchies, to the creation of weapons so terrifying they bent the laws of time itself. We will witness his physical destruction and spiritual transcendence, follow his mask through centuries of darkness, and ultimately see how this ancient heretic's influence reached across 1,000 years to shape the very fortress where Darth Vader would dwell. This is the complete story of Darth Momin, the Sith who terrified even other Sith, the artist of eternal suffering, the heretic who nearly destroyed both Jedi and Sith philosophy through the sheer extremity of his dark vision. So, settle in, close your eyes, and let the darkness embrace you as we explore one of the most disturbing chapters in the long history of the Sith Order. The birth of a dark artist. Every monster begins somewhere. Every architect of terror was once just a child. But some souls are born with a fundamental wrongness, a corruption that manifests long before they ever encounter philosophies of darkness or teachings of evil. Momin was such a being. The young Momin appeared unremarkable at first glance, at least by the standards of his species. He was a humanoid male with features that marked him as different from baseline humans. His skin held an ashen gray pallor, as if the very color of life had been leached from his flesh. Long flowing hair, golden blonde in his youth, framed a face with large, dilated hazel eyes that seemed to absorb more light than they reflected. His ears tapered to points, reminiscent of certain near-human species scattered throughout the galaxy. But it was not his physical appearance that made Momin different. It was what lurked behind those wide, staring eyes. From his earliest years, Momin possessed an unusual connection to the Force. He could feel it flowing through all living things, could sense the energies that bound the galaxy together. But where most Force-sensitive children feel wonder at this gift, where Jedi younglings learn compassion and connection, Momin felt something else entirely. He felt potential, not the potential for growth or healing or peace, but potential for transformation, for manipulation, for making something new from what already existed, regardless of the cost to the original form. His family lived a quiet existence, far from the grand conflicts between Jedi and Sith that raged across the galaxy. They were ordinary people with ordinary concerns. They had a pet, a creature called a ratacat. His father had been reluctant to get the animal, but his mother had insisted, perhaps hoping it would teach young Momin responsibility, empathy, the ability to care for another living being. The ratacat's name was Flitta, and it had the unfortunate distinction of becoming Momin's first sculpture. The creature had a habit of running away, a natural instinct toward freedom that most pets display from time to time. So when Flitta failed to appear one day, Momin's mother assumed it had simply wandered off again. She called for it, searched the surrounding area, expecting any moment to hear its distinctive sound or see it slink back home. Instead, she found her son in his room, standing before his newest creation. What she saw there would haunt her for the rest of her life. The ratacat had been transformed. Momin had used his growing connection to the Force to manipulate flesh, bone, and organ into something new, something horrific. The creature's body had been twisted and reshaped, parts of its anatomy exposed and rearranged in ways that defied natural order. Blood, fur, muscle, and sinew had been woven together into a grotesque monument to suffering. The young Momin stood before his work, his expression not one of horror or remorse, but of intense concentration, studying his creation with the clinical detachment of an artist evaluating his technique. His mother's scream must have shattered something in the household that day. Her son, her child, had taken a living creature entrusted to their care and transformed it into an abomination. But Momin felt no shame. He explained to her, probably with that same clinical distance, his philosophy of creation. He believed that if someone looked at a piece of art and felt nothing, then the artist had created nothing of value. True art, he insisted, must provoke an emotional response. The stronger the response, the more successful the art. By that metric, his sculpture of Flitta had been remarkably successful. His mother had felt a great deal. This incident marked the beginning of Momin's artistic career, though career seems far too civilized a word for what he did. Using animal remains, bones, and materials that others found obscene and repulsive, he continued to create. Each sculpture was more disturbing than the last. He showed his work to others, perhaps seeking validation, perhaps simply studying their reactions with that same analytical gaze he had turned upon his mutilated creations. The response was universal horror. People recoiled from his art. They looked upon his sculptures with abject disgust and mounting dread, their faces twisted with revulsion. They whispered about him, this strange gray-skinned boy with two wide eyes who made things that should not exist. For Momin, these reactions represented success. He was not creating beauty in any traditional sense. He was creating feeling, raw, visceral, undeniable emotional response. The negative nature of those emotions did not concern him. In his developing philosophy, negative emotions were often stronger than positive ones. Fear was more powerful than love. Horror was more memorable than joy. Disgust cut deeper than admiration. He was not trying to be liked, he was trying to be felt. But his community could not tolerate such creations in their midst. The sculptures were too disturbing, too wrong. They confiscated his tools and implements. They seized his materials, and they imprisoned young Momin, locking him away where he could no longer transform living flesh into monuments of suffering. It should have been the end of his dark artistic journey. A troubled child locked away from society, prevented from causing further harm, perhaps eventually forgotten. But the dark side of the force had other plans. You see, Momin's name began to spread. Whispers of the boy who made art from horror traveled beyond his homeworld. Stories circulated about sculptures so disturbing they could make grown beings weep or flee in terror. And these whispers eventually reached someone who saw potential rather than perversion in Momin's work. Someone who recognized that his twisted approach to creation represented a unique application of the dark side of the Force. Someone who needed an apprentice. Her name was Darth Shah. Lady Shah and the Path to Power. In the long and bloody history of the Sith Order, female Dark Lords were relatively rare. The title Darth had been claimed by countless Sith warriors and sorcerers over the millennia, but few women had risen to hold both the title and the rank of Dark Lord of the Sith. Darth Shah was one of these exceptional beings, a Sith lady who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Lady Shah cut an imposing figure. She was a female humanoid with brown hair that she kept tied back for combat, black eyes that gleamed with dark side power, and gray skin that marked her as something other than fully human. She dressed in the manner befitting a Sith Lord, her outfit adorned with spikes and flowing capes that spoke to both her status and her philosophy. Most distinctively, she wore a helmet that concealed much of her face, leaving only shadows and the gleam of those black eyes visible. She wielded two red lightsabers with devastating skill, employing a unique fighting style that mixed traditional and reverse grips, keeping opponents off balance and unable to predict her strikes. What drew Shah to Momin remains a fascinating question. She had heard the stories of the imprisoned boy who created art from flesh and bone. Many Sith might have dismissed such tales as the work of a disturbed child, nothing more than base cruelty without purpose or power. But Shah possessed insight that others lacked. She recognized that Momin's sculptures represented something more than simple sadism. They demonstrated an intuitive understanding of how to use the Force to transform living matter. They showed creativity applied to darkness, imagination wedded to corruption. And most importantly, they revealed a mind that was fundamentally different, unconstrained by conventional morality or traditional approaches to the dark side. So Lady Shah came for him. She traveled to wherever young Momin was imprisoned and mounted a one-woman rescue operation. The guards who tried to stop her did not live long. Her twin lightsabers cut through them with elegant brutality, their red blades leaving trails of light in the darkness. She carved her way to Momin's cell, cut through whatever barriers held him, and stood before the imprisoned boy. Imagine Momin's reaction in that moment. He had been locked away for his creations, punished for his art, told by everyone that what he did was wrong and evil. And suddenly, here stood a being of obvious power, crackling with dark side energy, having killed a way through his captors specifically to reach him. Shah looked at this strange child with his gray skin and haunted eyes, and she told him that he was no longer a prisoner. He was now her apprentice. Thus began Momin's formal education in the ways of the dark side of the Force. Under Lady Shah's tutelage, he learned techniques that had been passed down through generations of Sith. She taught him how to truly channel his connection to the Force, moving beyond intuitive manipulation to deliberate, powerful applications of dark side energy. She showed him how to hate properly, how to feed on negative emotions and transform them into strength. She demonstrated lightsaber combat, that elegant weapon from a more civilized age turned into an instrument of violence and death. Momin proved to be an exceptional student in many ways. He absorbed Shah's teachings with the same intense focus he had once applied to his sculptures. The mechanics of the Force came naturally to him. He learned to enhance his physical abilities through dark side energies, to sense presences through the Force, to manipulate objects with invisible hands. Under Shah's guidance, he even developed his own unique variation of Force lightning, that signature Sith power that channels pure destructive energy through the wielder's body and out through their fingertips. But it was in the construction of his own weapons that Momin truly began to distinguish himself. Following traditional Sith practice, he needed to create his own lightsabers. This process began with obtaining kyber crystals, those Force-attuned minerals that powered lightsabers. But where Jedi sought crystals that resonated with the light side and their own peaceful intentions, Sith took crystals by force and then subjected them to a process called bleeding. The Sith would pour their pain, their hatred, their rage into the crystal, forcing it to bend to the dark side. The crystal would crack and corrupt under this assault, turning from its natural colors to blood red, forever marking it as a weapon of the dark. Momin bled his own kyber crystals under Shah's watchful gaze. He constructed not one, but two lightsabers, elegant weapons with slightly curved hilts that gave them an unusual appearance, almost like rapiers from ancient dueling traditions. These were precision instruments, weapons suited to his particular style. Where some Sith favored raw power and overwhelming aggression, Momin's approach was more surgical, more deliberate. His twin red blades became extensions of his artistic vision, tools for sculpting in the medium of combat. Lady Shah also taught him her preferred lightsaber form. She was a master duelist, and she imparted her knowledge to her apprentice. Momin trained relentlessly, his tall and slender frame gaining deadly grace as he practiced strikes, parries, and combinations. He learned to wield both sabers simultaneously, creating a wall of crimson energy that could overwhelm defenses through sheer complexity of attack patterns. Under Shah's instruction, Momin became formidable in combat, though battle was never truly his passion. For Momin, lightsaber technique was just another form of art, another way to transform the physical world through the application of power. During this period of apprenticeship, Momin undertook a project that would become central to his legend. He created what would later be known as the Mask of Lord Momin. Using techniques Shah had taught him and applying his own twisted artistic vision, he forged a helmet unlike any other in Sith history. The mask had a skull-like quality, an eerie reminder of mortality given form in dark metal. Its smooth finish belied the complex Sith alchemy woven into its creation, dark side energies bound into the very material of its construction. When worn, the mask would conceal the wearer's face completely, leaving only the glow of eyes visible through the narrow visor. But Momin did not simply create the mask and don it. That would have been too simple, too normal. Instead, once the mask was complete, he performed an act so extreme that it horrified even his master. Lady Shah watched as her apprentice took his own lightsabers, activated them to their lowest power setting, and proceeded to mutilate his own face. He carved permanent scars into his flesh with the precision of a surgeon and the dedication of a fanatic. The smell of burning flesh filled the air as he disfigured himself, creating a permanent testimony to his commitment to the dark side. Only when his face was a ruined landscape of scar tissue did he finally place the mask over it, hiding his self-inflicted wounds behind that skull-like visage. For Momin, this act of self-mutilation served multiple purposes. It was proof of his dedication, demonstrating that he would go to any length in service of his art and his philosophy. It was also an aesthetic choice. He found beauty in mutilated flesh, as his early sculptures had demonstrated. By scarring himself, he was making himself into one of his own creations, transforming his body into a living piece of dark art. The mask then became both a concealment and a frame, hiding his disfigurement while also marking him as forever changed, forever committed to his dark path. Lady Shah must have realized during this period that her apprentice was not like other Sith. His motivations were strange, his priorities alien even to dark side wielders. Most Sith sought power for its own sake. They wanted to dominate, to rule, to impose their will upon the galaxy. Momin cared nothing for such ambitions. He wanted only to create, to sculpt, to transform the physical world into expressions of dark side philosophy. This made him both valuable and dangerous. Valuable because his unique perspective might yield innovations in Sith technique. Dangerous because he was fundamentally unpredictable, operating according to an internal logic that others could barely comprehend. But there was a growing problem in the master-apprentice relationship. From the very beginning, when Shah first called him her apprentice and herself his master, Momin had never truly understood or accepted this dynamic. The traditional Sith hierarchy, with its clear delineations of master above and apprentice below, felt wrong to him, offensive even. In his philosophy, calling oneself a master was anathema to the dark side. It implied stasis, completion, a final state of being. But the dark side was about transformation, constant change, eternal evolution. How could anyone claim to have mastered it? How could he, Momin, accept being called lesser than anyone else? These thoughts festered in his mind throughout his training. Lady Shah had given him so much. She had freed him from prison, taught him the ways of the Sith, helped him develop his power. He was genuinely grateful for her instruction. But gratitude did not erase his fundamental objection to being labeled her inferior. And so, as his power grew and his skill increased, Momin began to contemplate an action that was, in its own way, perfectly traditional for a Sith. He began to plan the murder of his master. The murder of the master. The relationship between master and apprentice in the Sith Order has always been defined by tension and inevitability. Unlike the Jedi, who sought to build bonds of trust and respect between teachers and students, the Sith embraced conflict as the engine of growth. A Sith master trained their apprentice knowing that one day, if the apprentice was truly worthy, they would attempt to overthrow and kill their master. This was not betrayal. It was graduation. It proved that the apprentice had learned well and grown strong. The rule of two, which would be established by Darth Bane just a few years after Momin's time, would formalize this principle, but the concept was already deeply embedded in Sith culture. What made Momin's situation unusual was his motivation. Most Sith apprentices killed their masters out of ambition, seeking to claim the title of master for themselves and take on their own apprentice, continuing the cycle. But Momin had no interest in becoming a master. He found the very concept philosophically repugnant. He killed Lady Shah not to take her place in the hierarchy, but to escape the hierarchy entirely. The duel between Momin and Shah was not a surprise attack or an assassination. In keeping with Sith tradition, it took the form of open combat. Perhaps Momin challenged her directly, or perhaps Shah sensed his growing resentment and decided to test him. Either way, master and apprentice faced each other with lightsabers ignited, red blades humming in the air between them. Lady Shah was a formidable opponent. She had survived countless battles, proven herself against Jedi and rival Sith alike. Her dual-wielding technique combined grace with lethality, her reverse grip strikes coming from unexpected angles, while her standard grip maintained defensive capability. She moved with confidence born of experience, a warrior who had danced with death so many times that its rhythms had become second nature to her. Against most opponents, her skill would have been overwhelming, but Momin was not most opponents. He had learned everything Shah could teach him, studied her every technique, observed her fighting style during their training sessions with an artist's eye for detail. He knew her patterns, her preferences, the subtle tells that preceded each of her attacks. More than that, he fought with a calm detachment that unnerved even experienced duelists. Where most Sith channeled rage and passion into their combat, Momin approached the duel with clinical precision. This was not emotional, it was necessary. A problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed, just another transformation to be enacted through the application of violence. Their lightsabers clashed, red meeting red in explosions of plasma energy. Shah pressed her attack, using her superior experience to drive Momin back, testing his defenses with rapid combinations and unexpected feints. For a time, it seemed she might prevail. After all, she had trained him. Surely she understood his capabilities better than anyone. Surely she could defeat him. But understanding someone's capabilities and predicting their actions are different things. Shah had taught Momin technique and form. She had instructed him in the fundamentals of combat. What she had not taught him, could not have taught him, was his particular kind of creativity. That twisted imagination that had transformed a Rata-cat into a sculpture of horror now applied itself to the problem of killing his master. The killing blow came with theatrical timing. Momin caught Shah mid-air, likely during one of her acrobatic attacks, and drove one of his curved lightsabers through her abdomen. The red blade pierced her body, plasma burning through flesh and organ with brutal efficiency. Momin held her there, impaled on his weapon, watching as the light faded from those black eyes. Watching as his master died. Lady Shah had been wrong, and Momin had proven it to her in the only way that mattered in Sith philosophy. She had believed that the title of master was appropriate, that the hierarchy of master and apprentice served the dark side. Momin had demonstrated through superior force that this belief was flawed. He was second to none. The dark side did not operate according to fixed hierarchies. It flowed and changed and transformed, and Momin would flow with it, unbound by the constraints of tradition. As Shah's body fell, Momin claimed the resources and knowledge she had accumulated. Ancient texts, Sith artifacts, perhaps even the location of dark side nexuses she had discovered during her own journeys. These would fuel his next phase of development. But more valuable than any physical inheritance was the freedom her death represented. Momin was no longer an apprentice, but neither would he become a master. In a decision that would later mark him as a heretic even among the Sith, Momin declared that he would never take an apprentice of his own. This was unprecedented. The Sith way was built on passing knowledge from one generation to the next. Even the most selfish Dark Lords recognized the utility of having an apprentice, someone to do their bidding, extend their reach, and potentially replace them should they prove worthy. But Momin rejected this entirely. He insisted that the concept of calling oneself a master was offensive to the dark side. To take an apprentice would be to claim mastery, to suggest that he had reached a final state of development. And Momin believed there was always more to learn, more to discover, more to create. This philosophy, while logical within its own framework, threatened the entire structure of Sith knowledge transmission. If powerful Sith refused to take apprentices, their discoveries and innovations would die with them. The Sith Order would stagnate, each generation forced to rediscover what previous generations had learned. Lady Shah herself had likely learned from her own master, who learned from their master, stretching back through a chain of dark side wielders that extended centuries or even millennia into the past. Momin was breaking that chain, declaring himself a dead end, a branch of the Sith family tree that would bear no fruit. But Momin did not view himself as part of the Sith family tree. He saw himself as something else entirely, an independent artist working in the medium of dark side power. He did not need the validation of other Sith. He did not seek to build an empire or found a dynasty. He wanted only to create works that would honor the dark side itself. And so, having freed himself from the constraints of the master-apprentice relationship, he set out on his own path. A path that would lead him deeper into darkness than almost any Sith before him. The murder of Lady Shah marked the end of Momin's education and the beginning of his true work. Now, unbound by any master's expectations or tradition's limitations, he could pursue his vision without compromise. He would travel to sites strong in the dark side, seeking inspiration and power. He would study ancient Sith holocrons, absorbing knowledge from long-dead Dark Lords. He would push the boundaries of what the Force could do, experimenting with techniques so extreme that future Sith would refuse to replicate them. And he would begin work on creations that would make his early sculptures seem like child's play in comparison. The dark side called to him, and Momin answered with an artist's devotion and a fanatic's zeal. He was about to embark on a journey that would produce some of the most terrifying weapons in galactic history. And the galaxy, still ignorant of his existence, had no idea what horror was gestating in the mind of the Sith, who refused to be anyone's master or apprentice. Momin was simply Momin, and that was far more dangerous than any title could ever convey. The Heretic's Quest. With Lady Shah dead and her resources at his disposal, Momin stood at a crossroads that would define the rest of his existence. Many Sith in his position would have sought to establish themselves among other Dark Lords, to claim territory and gather followers, to begin building a power base that could eventually lead to dominance over the Sith Order itself. But Momin's goals were far more unusual and, in their own way, far more ambitious than simple conquest. He began to travel, not in search of worlds to conquer or enemies to defeat, but in search of understanding. He sought out locations where the dark side of the Force was particularly strong, places where the veil between the physical world and the realm of pure dark side energy grew thin. These dark side nexuses existed throughout the galaxy, created by ancient battles, mass deaths, or deliberate Sith rituals. They were places where the Force itself seemed wounded, where darkness pooled like blood in a depression, where those sensitive to such things could feel the raw power thrumming through the very stones beneath their feet. At each such location, Momin studied. He meditated in his twisted way, opening himself to the dark side energies that saturated these places. He experimented with new applications of Force power, pushing boundaries that more cautious practitioners would have avoided. Where most Force users, even Sith, maintained some degree of separation between themselves and the Force, treating it as a tool to be wielded, Momin sought to blur that distinction. He wanted to understand not just how to use the dark side, but how to become an instrument of the dark side, to make himself a conduit through which its power could flow without resistance or dilution. This approach led him to develop abilities that even other Sith found disturbing. His variation of Force lightning was different from the standard Sith technique. While traditional Force lightning channeled the user's rage and hatred into arcs of electrical energy, Momin's version incorporated his artistic sensibilities and unique understanding of the Force. The exact nature of his technique is lost to history, suppressed by later Sith who deemed his methods too extreme to preserve. But witnesses who saw him wield this power described it as fundamentally wrong, as if the lightning itself was screaming. In addition to his travels to dark side locations, Momin also sought out Sith holocrons. These pyramid-shaped devices served as repositories of Sith knowledge, each one created by a Dark Lord to preserve their teachings and philosophies for future generations. Holocrons were interactive, their gatekeeper constructs able to teach and answer questions, passing on the accumulated wisdom of their creators. For Momin, these devices represented a vast library of dark side lore, techniques that had taken lifetimes to develop and refine. He absorbed everything the holocrons could teach him. Ancient Sith combat techniques, arcane rituals for manipulating life force, forbidden knowledge about the nature of the Force itself, theories about how the dark side related to time, space, and reality. All of it fed into Momin's growing understanding and his developing philosophy. But he was not merely a student collecting knowledge. He was synthesizing what he learned with his own unique perspective, creating something new and terrible. During this period of independent study and development, Momin created one of his most infamous works, the Fermata Cage. This device, whose very name suggested a musical direction to extend a note beyond its usual duration, represented a breakthrough in Momin's exploration of dark side applications. In musical notation, a fermata indicates that a note should be held longer than normal. Momin's Fermata Cage applied this concept to time itself. The cage resembled an hourglass in its basic structure, but its mechanism was far more complex than any simple timepiece. Within its glass surface, held in place by a dark side matrix that only a Sith could create, were miniature black holes. These impossibly dense points of space-time warping, contained and controlled through dark side power, gave the cage its ability to manipulate time itself. Using concentrated dark side energy, either applied directly by a powerful Force user or channeled through an elaborate mechanism, the cage could freeze individual moments and suspend people or places in time. Those trapped within could then be recalled to the present as if no time had passed. The applications of such a device were staggering. A being could be imprisoned forever, conscious but unable to move or age or die. A place could be preserved in a moment of particular significance, becoming a monument frozen in time. The Fermata Cage was not a weapon of destruction like a lightsaber or a superweapon. It was something more insidious. It was a tool for stealing pieces of reality itself and holding them apart from the natural flow of time. The Sith Order, when they eventually became aware of the Fermata Cage's existence, banned the technology. This was telling. The Sith, who had created weapons capable of destroying entire star systems, who had developed techniques to drain the life from entire planets, who had engaged in atrocities too numerous to catalog, drew the line at Momin's temporal prison. Perhaps they feared what such technology could do in the wrong hands. Or perhaps they simply recognized that Momin's approach to the dark side was fundamentally different from their own, and therefore threatening to the established order. But the Fermata Cage was just a prelude to Momin's true masterpiece. As he traveled and studied and experimented, he began to formulate an idea that was grander and more horrifying than anything he had created before. All his early sculptures, all his experiments with the Force, all his development of new techniques, they had all been preparation for this. Momin believed that he needed to create a work of art worthy of the dark side itself. Not art for people to appreciate, not art to build a legacy or earn recognition from other Sith. Art that would serve as an offering to the Force, a monument to darkness so profound that reality itself would take note. He meditated on this concept, opening himself to the guidance of the dark side. And the Force answered him. It reached out through the web of dark energies that connected all things, and it gave him direction. It told him to choose a city, not a world, not a civilization, a city, some populated urban center where beings lived out their lives in ignorance of the darkness that was taking notice of them. The Force, in its dark aspect, had selected the canvas. Now, Momin needed to decide what to paint upon it and how to execute his vision. He began gathering followers during this phase of his planning. Though he refused to take an apprentice in the traditional sense, Momin recognized that ambitious projects required assistance. He attracted a group of acolytes, dark side practitioners who were drawn to his reputation and power, but lacked the strength or vision to become Sith lords themselves. These followers feared him, as one should fear of being capable of manipulating the fundamental forces of reality. But they also admired him, drawn to his certainty and the sheer audacity of his designs. To these acolytes, Momin was unlike any Sith they had encountered. He did not rant about destroying the Jedi or conquering the Republic. He did not scheme about political power or personal advancement. Instead, he spoke about art and beauty and the aesthetics of suffering. He described his vision of freezing a moment of pure terror, of preserving horror in its most potent form, of creating something that would exist outside the normal flow of time as an eternal testimony to the power of the dark side. Using the resources he had inherited from Lady Shah, along with materials he had accumulated during his travels, Momin began the design process for his ultimate creation. This would not be a small sculpture or a contained device like the Fermata cage. This would be a weapon, but unlike any weapon the galaxy had ever seen. It would have the power to destroy, yes, but destruction was not its purpose. Destruction was instantaneous, a flash of heat and light, and then nothing. Momin wanted something more lasting, more meaningful, more beautiful in its own terrible way. He designed an engine, a massive power source capable of channeling enormous amounts of energy, but the energy it would channel was not conventional. This engine would be fueled by the Force itself, specifically by the dark side. Momin planned to pour his unique form of Force lightning into this engine at the moment of ignition, using his own connection to the dark side as a catalyst and conduit. The engine would then release this energy in a specific way, shaped by Momin's will and artistic vision. The weapon's primary function would be to obliterate the chosen city. This was the surface level of the design, the obvious capability that any observer would understand. A massive engine capable of reducing an entire city to ash in moments. But that was not the innovation. Superweapons capable of destroying cities had existed before and would exist again. The Death Star would one day destroy entire planets. Momin's weapon was far less destructive in scale, but what it lacked in raw destructive power, it made up for in pure horror. Because the weapon had a secondary function, a capability that revealed Momin's true genius and his complete departure from anything resembling mercy or sanity. As the engine activated and began its work of destruction, it would use dark side power to manipulate time itself. Specifically, it would slow the flow of time for those caught in its effect, not stop time completely, as that would defeat the purpose, but slow it, stretch it, make seconds become hours, hours become days, days become years from the perspective of those trapped within. The inhabitants of the city would see the destruction coming. They would watch as the weapon activated and death approached. They would feel the heat beginning to build, the first touch of obliteration reaching their skin, and they would realize that they were about to die. This moment, This precise instant when the mind fully comprehends its own imminent destruction would be the moment that Momin captured. The expressions of horror and pain and absolute terror that crossed the faces of the citizens would be frozen not just in that instant, but for eternity. Like insects preserved in amber, these people would exist in the temporal prison of Momin's creation, forever dying but never quite dead, forever experiencing the worst moment of their existence with no hope of it ending. Every scream locked in throats, every prayer cut short, every desperate attempt at escape frozen mid-motion, an entire city's population transformed into a three-dimensional sculpture of ultimate suffering, a monument to fear itself. This was Momin's vision. This was his masterpiece. This was his offering to the dark side of the Force, and with his acolytes' assistance and the resources at his command, he began the process of making this nightmare into reality. The galaxy remained ignorant of what was being prepared. Somewhere, on some unfortunate world, a city full of people went about their daily lives. They worked and loved and argued and laughed, completely unaware that they had been selected as the medium for a Sith heretic's greatest work of art. They did not know that their screams would soon become an eternal symphony. They could not imagine that their terror would be preserved forever as a monument to darkness. But Momin knew, and he proceeded with his plans with the methodical care of an artist, preparing their canvas, and the cold calculation of a being utterly divorced from empathy or human feeling. The weapon was designed, the techniques were developed, the location was chosen, all that remained was execution, and then the galaxy would witness what true dark side artistry could achieve. The heretic's quest was nearing its culmination. Soon, Darth Momin would create his masterpiece, and the Jedi Order, sensing a disturbance in the Force of unprecedented magnitude, would move to stop him. The ultimate masterpiece, the construction of Momin's superweapon, must have been an undertaking of staggering complexity. This was not a device that could be assembled from standard components or built according to known engineering principles. It required the fusion of conventional technology with arcane Sith alchemy, the marriage of mechanical engineering with dark side sorcery. Every circuit had to be designed to channel Force energy. Every component needed to be capable of withstanding the reality-warping energies it would contain. This was as much ritual as construction, each piece placed with ceremonial precision, each connection made with dark intentions woven into the very structure. Momin's acolytes worked under his direction, following designs that perhaps only he fully understood. They were desperate to assist him, drawn by his reputation and the promise of witnessing something unprecedented in Sith history. These followers were not merely technicians or engineers. They were dark side practitioners in their own right, capable of channeling the Force and understanding at least the basics of Sith sorcery. Their contributions were essential. One being alone, no matter how powerful, could not have created what Momin envisioned, but under his guidance, working in concert with his vision, they made the impossible into reality. The weapon itself took the form of a spacecraft, a vessel large enough to house the massive engine at its core while maintaining the systems necessary for flight and operation. This mobility was crucial to Momin's design. The weapon needed to position itself precisely above the target city. It needed to hover there while the mechanism activated. maintaining perfect stability while the dark side energies built to their catastrophic crescendo. Any instability, any deviation from the planned position could disrupt the delicate work of time manipulation that was central to the weapon's true purpose. Imagine the appearance of this craft. It would have been unlike any conventional starship, its design dictated by function and by Momin's aesthetic sensibilities rather than by practical spacefaring concerns. Dark metals formed into shapes that seemed to suggest both technology and organic growth. The engine visible through translucent sections, a heart of darkness pulsing with contained power. External arrays and focusing elements positioned with mathematical precision to shape and direct the energies that would soon be unleashed. This was a work of engineering, yes, but also a sculpture. Momin's artistic vision permeated every aspect of its construction. As the weapon neared completion, Momin refined the details of his plan. He would position the ship over the chosen city and activate the engine. At the precise moment of ignition, he would channel his modified force lightning into the mechanism, using his own body as a conduit for dark side power. This connection between himself and the weapon was essential. The time manipulation required constant focus and will. He needed to slow time at exactly the right moment, sustaining the effect long enough for the destruction to begin but not complete, freezing the city and its inhabitants in that perfect instant of terror. The timing would be everything. Too early, and the people would not yet understand their doom. The terror would be incomplete, mere confusion, rather than full comprehension of death approaching. Too late, and the destruction would be instant, erasing the city and its population before fear could truly take hold. Momin needed the precise moment when every mind in that city simultaneously realized what was happening and understood there was no escape. That moment of collective horror, stretching across an entire population, would be the apex of his artistry. He also refined his philosophy during this final phase of preparation. Momin had come to believe that the dark side of the Force was not merely a tool or even a source of power. It was an audience, perhaps the only audience that truly mattered. Normal beings looked at his sculptures and felt disgust or horror, and while these reactions pleased him, they were ultimately shallow. People did not understand what he was trying to achieve. They could not see the beauty and transformation through suffering, but the Force understood. The dark side appreciated his work, and this final masterpiece would be an offering directly to that darkness, a gift to the cosmic power that had guided him to this moment. The Force reached out to him during his meditations, confirming his path. It had told him to choose a city, and he had. It had shown him the technique for manipulating time, and he had developed it. Now it waited, like a critic in an empty gallery, for the artist to unveil his greatest work. Momin felt the weight of that attention. The dark side was watching. He would not disappoint it. Finally, the weapon was ready. Every system tested. Every component verified. The engine hummed with barely contained power, fed by the dark side nexus that Momin had carefully cultivated within its core. The ship lifted off, moving through atmosphere toward its destination. Down below, in the target city, beings went about their lives. They looked up as the strange vessel passed overhead, perhaps wondering what manner of craft it was, perhaps already feeling the first tendrils of unease as the Force-sensitive among them sensed something terribly wrong approaching. Momin positioned his ship with precision, every adjustment exact, every measurement verified. Below him spread an entire city, millions of beings, each living their own life, each with their own hopes and fears and dreams. He looked down upon them not with hatred or malice, but with the detached consideration of an artist contemplating a canvas. They were about to become part of something greater than their individual existences. They would be transformed into art. They should have been honored. The engine activated. Power surged through systems designed to contain forces that could tear reality itself. Momin felt the weapon responding to his will, the dark side energies flowing through him and into the mechanism. This was the moment, the culmination of everything he had worked toward since his first sculpture carved from a rotocat. This would be his legacy, his masterpiece, his gift to the darkness. Below, in the city, people began to notice something wrong. The sky changed color. The air itself seemed to tremble. Those sensitive to the force felt a wave of dark power washing over them, a tsunami of malevolent energy building toward some terrible crescendo. Panic began to spread. People ran, though they did not know where to run. Parents grabbed children. The elderly sought shelter. Alarms blared. Authorities scrambled to understand what was happening and mount some kind of response. But there was no response that could save them. Momin's weapon was already activating. The engine reached the critical threshold. He channeled his force lightning into it, feeling the power multiply and transform as it flowed through the systems he had designed. The weapon began its work. Heat built, energy focused, and time itself began to slow for those caught within the weapon's field of effect. The people of the city felt the change. Seconds stretched. Movements became syrup slow. They saw the light building above them, impossibly bright, impossibly hot. They understood with absolute certainty that death was coming, and they felt terror unlike anything they had known in their lives. Pure, undiluted horror at the approach of obliteration, faces twisted into expressions of ultimate fear, mouths opened in screams that would never complete, eyes widened with the knowledge of doom, an entire population frozen in their worst moment. Momin witnessed his creation unfolding and knew it was perfect. This was art, this was beauty, this was meaning carved from suffering. The dark side would be pleased. He had created something worthy, and then the Jedi arrived. Destruction and transcendence. The Jedi Order had sensed the disturbance. How could they not? A convergence of dark side energy that massive, a weapon that powerful being activated, sent ripples through the force that could be felt across star systems. Somewhere, a Jedi master or group of masters had sensed Momin's intention. They had tracked the source of the darkness, and they had come to stop it, as Jedi had always attempted to stop the Sith. They infiltrated the weapon ship even as it hovered over the doomed city. These were not ordinary Jedi, but combat specialists, warriors hardened by conflict with dark side users. They cut through Momin's acolytes with brutal efficiency. Lightsabers, blue and green, clashed against the red blades of the Sith followers. The acolytes fought with desperation and dark side fury, but they were outmatched. One by one, they fell to the superior skill and coordination of the Jedi assault team. The sounds of battle reached Momin in his control chamber. He heard the distinctive snap hiss of lightsabers igniting, the screams of his acolytes dying, the shouts of Jedi giving orders and coordinating their attack. Part of his mind registered this threat. Part of him understood that he was in mortal danger, but he could not stop, could not afford to break his concentration. The weapon was active. The time manipulation was engaged. His masterpiece was unfolding. He needed just a few more seconds, just a little more time to complete the perfect freezing of that moment of terror. The Jedi burst into his chamber. They saw Momin standing at the controls, his mask hiding his scarred face, his entire being focused on the weapon he had created. They saw the city below, caught in temporal distortion, its citizens frozen in expressions of horror. They understood immediately what they were witnessing: an atrocity in progress, a nightmare given form, the absolute corruption of everything the Force should represent. They did not try to reason with him. This was not a being who could be turned back to the light. This was not someone who had fallen and might be redeemed. This was a Sith heretic so far gone into darkness that dialogue was pointless. They attacked, meaning to kill him quickly and then shut down his abomination of a weapon. But their very presence was enough to disrupt Momin's delicate work. The light side of the Force, channeled through multiple Jedi, acted like a counterweight to the dark side energies Momin was manipulating. The balance shifted. The careful control he maintained over the weapon systems began to slip. He tried to maintain his focus, tried to push back against the light, tried to complete his masterpiece despite the interference. But it was too much. The opposing energies of light and dark, focused through Force wielders on both sides, created an instability in the very mechanism he had built. The weapon spun out of control. The carefully directed flow of energy became chaotic. The time manipulation failed, releasing its grip on the city below. But the engine was still active, still building power, still preparing to discharge. Without Momin's guiding will, without the precise application of dark side energies to shape its effect, the weapon reverted to its most basic function: destruction. Pure, simple, total destruction. The city below was obliterated in an instant, not slowly, not with the cruel preservation of suffering that Momin had intended, but quickly, mercifully, if such a word could apply to annihilation. Buildings vaporized, streets melted, millions of beings ceased to exist in the time it takes to draw breath. The light of the explosion could be seen from orbit, a brief sun igniting on the surface of the world and then fading. Momin must have felt his masterpiece shatter in that moment. All his planning, all his preparation, all his vision of creating the perfect monument to fear, reduced to simple slaughter. The people had died, but they had not died as art. They had not been frozen in a moment of terror. They had simply been erased. It was waste, meaningless destruction, everything he had worked to avoid. But he had no time to mourn his failed creation. The weapon was exploding. The containment systems, designed to hold reality-warping energies, were failing catastrophically. The engine at the heart of the vessel was coming apart. Dark side power, no longer properly channeled and directed, was tearing through the structure like acid through flesh. The ship began to break up, hull plates separating, systems overloading, the very space around it beginning to distort as the uncontrolled energies warped local reality. Momin stood at the center of this chaos. The Jedi who had infiltrated his ship were either dead, killed by the backwash of dark side energy, or fleeing, recognizing that staying aboard meant certain death. But Momin did not run. Where would he run to? His life's work was destroyed. His ultimate offering to the dark side had failed. The Force had asked him to choose a city, and he had. He had transformed it, yes, but not into art, only into ash. The explosion consumed him. Plasma and fire and uncontrolled dark side energy tore through the chamber where he stood. His body, that tall, slender frame with its gray skin and scarred face, was vaporized in microseconds. Flesh burned away, bones turned to ash. The physical form of Darth Momin ceased to exist. Scattered across the upper atmosphere of the world he had tried to transform into his canvas. By any normal measure, this should have been the end. A Sith heretic, destroyed by his own weapon, killed while attempting to commit an atrocity of unprecedented scale. The Jedi would have considered it justice. Other Sith would have seen it as failure. Either way, Momin should have been finished. His consciousness should have dissolved into the Force, his ambitions ended, his dark artistic vision extinguished. But Momin was not a normal Sith, and the mask he had created was not a normal Sith artifact. During his apprenticeship under Lady Shah, when he had crafted that skull-like helmet and then mutilated his own face before donning it, he had woven something into its creation. Whether deliberately or instinctively, he had bound his essence to the mask using techniques so advanced that they bordered on the alchemical secrets the ancient Sith had used to achieve forms of immortality. As his body burned, Momin's consciousness fled into the mask. His spirit, his sense of self, everything that made him, Momin transferred into the artifact he had created. This was not true immortality in the sense that he could live forever in his own body. It was something stranger and more limited. His physical form was gone, but his mind, his awareness, his twisted artistic vision, all of it survived within the confines of that metal construct. The mask fell from the disintegrating ship. It tumbled through the atmosphere, heated by friction, but protected by the dark side energies woven into its structure. It struck the surface of the planet, far from the obliterated city, landing in some uninhabited area. There it lay, inert to all appearances, just another piece of debris from the destroyed Sith weapon, just another artifact to be collected and cataloged by whoever eventually came to investigate the catastrophe. But inside the mask, Momin's consciousness stirred. He was alive, changed, certainly, diminished in some ways, but conscious and aware and still capable of thought. He could feel the dark side flowing around him. He could sense presences through the Force when beings came near. And he discovered that he could do more than simply observe. He could influence, corrupt, possess. The exact mechanics of this ability remain unclear. Perhaps it was built into the mask's design from the beginning. Perhaps it was an emergent property of binding consciousness to an object. But the mask could project visions to those who looked upon it. It could whisper to minds not strong enough to resist its pull. And if someone actually wore the mask, if they placed it upon their own head and allowed it to cover their face, Momin's spirit could take control. He could ride in their body, use their hands, speak with their voice. It was a form of possession made possible by the unique circumstances of his transcendence. The Jedi eventually found the mask, recognizing it as a Sith artifact and sensing the dark power contained within. They took it into custody. They should have destroyed it. That would have been the wise course of action. But the Jedi Order of this era maintained a policy of preserving dangerous artifacts in secure vaults rather than risking the unpredictable effects that destroying such objects might cause. Some artifacts, when destroyed, released their contained power in catastrophic ways. Better to contain and study than to risk unleashing something worse. So the mask of Lord Momin was taken to Coruscant, to the great Jedi temple that stood at the heart of the galactic capital. There, in a secret vault far below the temple's public areas, in a chamber protected by the strongest force techniques the Jedi could devise, the mask was placed alongside other dangerous Sith relics, holocrons that whispered madness, weapons that corrupted their wielders, texts that drove readers insane. All the dangerous knowledge and power that the Jedi had confiscated over centuries of conflict with the Sith, locked away where it could do no harm. And there Momin waited, conscious but imprisoned, aware but powerless. His physical body was gone. His masterpiece had failed. His name would be erased from both Jedi and Sith records. Deemed too dangerous to preserve, he should have been forgotten entirely. Another dead Sith Lord among thousands, his failed weapon just another atrocity in the long, bloody history of dark side wielders. But Momin was patient. He had to be. He was a consciousness trapped in a mask, stored in a vault, buried under a Jedi temple. Escape seemed impossible. Resurrection seemed fantastical. Yet he did not despair. He could not truly despair. The dark side sustained him, and he believed with the absolute certainty of a true fanatic that one day opportunity would present itself. One day the vault would be opened. One day the mask would find its way back into the galaxy. And when that day came, Momin would create again. All he needed was time. And time, for a being with no body to age and no life to end, was the one resource of which he had an infinite supply. The dark side had not finished with Darth Momin. His story was not over. It had merely reached an intermission. The next act would not begin for more than 1,000 years. But it would begin. The mask waited in darkness, and within the mask, Momin dreamed of art and horror, and the masterpiece he had not yet completed. 1,000 years of silence. The galaxy moved on without Darth Momin. Years became decades. Decades became centuries. The conflicts that had defined his era gradually evolved into new struggles. The numerous Sith Lords who had operated during Momin's lifetime were reduced to a single surviving Dark Lord. Darth Bane, survivor of the 7th Battle of Ruusan, implemented the rule of two, declaring that henceforth there would be only one Sith Master and one Sith Apprentice at any given time. This radical restructuring of Sith philosophy was intended to eliminate the infighting and backstabbing that had weakened the Order. Power would be concentrated, passed from master to apprentice in an unbroken chain, each generation growing stronger than the last. The rule of two would have horrified Momin. His entire philosophy had rejected the master-apprentice dynamic. He had killed Lady Shah specifically to escape that hierarchy. But in his prison beneath the Jedi Temple, he could not voice his objections or influence events. He could only wait and observe, to the extent that he could sense anything at all through the layers of force shielding that surrounded the vault. The Jedi Order believed the Sith extinct. After the Battle of Ruusan, after the thought bomb that destroyed both Jedi and Sith forces, the surviving Jedi found no evidence of any remaining Dark Lords. They did not know about Darth Bane. They did not know that the Sith had simply gone into hiding, working in the shadows, preparing for eventual revenge. the Jedi allowed themselves to believe that a thousand-year conflict had finally ended. They lowered their guard. They focused on serving the Republic and maintaining peace rather than preparing for war. For the next millennium, the Jedi and the Republic enjoyed what historians would later call a golden age: relative peace, prosperity, expansion into previously unexplored regions of the galaxy. The Jedi trained new generations of peacekeepers and diplomats. They built their numbers, established temples on numerous worlds, and became intertwined with the governance structures of the Republic. They were respected, trusted, powerful, and they remained completely ignorant of the chain of Sith working in secret, passing the title of Darth from master to apprentice generation after generation, biding their time and perfecting their vengeance. During this long period, the vault beneath the Jedi Temple remained sealed. Few Jedi even knew of its existence. It was a secret kept by the highest masters, knowledge passed down from Grand Master to Grand Master. The artifacts contained within were too dangerous to study extensively and too valuable as records of dark side techniques to simply destroy. So they remained, locked away, gathering dust, while the galaxy above continued its slow dance toward the eventual return of the Sith. Momin experienced this millennium of waiting in ways that would drive a normal being mad. He had no eyes to see, yet he could sense presences through the Force when beings came near his vault. He had no body to feel the passage of time, yet he remained conscious and aware. His sense of self did not dissolve or fade. The mask preserved him in perfect stasis, unchanging and undying. His artistic vision remained sharp. His memories of Lady Shah's teachings, of dark side nexuses he had visited, of the weapon he had built, and the city he had tried to transform into eternal art, all of it stayed clear and vivid. If he felt boredom or despair during those long centuries, no record of it exists. Perhaps the dark side sustained him with visions and dreams. Perhaps he spent the time refining his theories and planning what he would do when freedom eventually came. Or perhaps consciousness trapped in an object experiences time differently than embodied beings, making the millennium seem shorter or less oppressive than it would have been otherwise. Whatever his internal experience, Momin endured. He waited, and he prepared himself for the opportunity he believed would eventually present itself. Above the vault, the galaxy continued its evolution. The Sith chain worked its way through numerous iterations. Darth Bane passed his knowledge to Darth Zana, she to her apprentice, and so on, generation after generation, each Sith Lord learning from their master before killing them and taking an apprentice of their own. The chain remained hidden from the Jedi. The Sith learned patience. They learned to wait. They learned to work through proxies and shadows, influencing galactic events without revealing their presence. Eventually, the chain led to a being who would change everything. Darth Sidious, also known as Senator Palpatine of Naboo. This Sith Lord was patient beyond measure and cunning beyond calculation. He spent decades implementing a plan to destroy both the Jedi Order and the Republic, infiltrating the very government he intended to overthrow, manipulating events across the entire galaxy toward a single catastrophic moment when both his enemies would fall. Part of Sidious's grand plan involved discovering and collecting Sith artifacts. He scoured the galaxy for holocrons, weapons, and relics left behind by ancient Dark Lords. Each artifact represented knowledge, power, or techniques that might prove useful in his bid to achieve ultimate dominion. And his search eventually led him to become aware of the secret vault beneath the Jedi Temple. The vault that contained, among many other dangerous objects, the mask of Lord Momin. But Sidious could not simply walk into the Jedi Temple and demand access to their most secure location. He needed the perfect opportunity. He needed the Jedi to be destroyed or scattered. He needed chaos that would allow him to plunder their greatest secrets without resistance. And so he continued his patient work, manipulating events, starting wars, turning the Clone Wars into the perfect trap that would destroy the Jedi Order from within. In the year 19 years before the Battle of Yavin, Sidious finally triggered the endgame of his plan. Order 66, the command that turned the clone troopers against their Jedi commanders. Across the galaxy, Jedi fell by the thousands, betrayed by the soldiers they had fought beside, cut down without warning. The order that had stood for 1,000 years was shattered in a single day. But Sidious wanted more than just the death of the Jedi. He wanted their knowledge. He wanted their artifacts. He wanted to ensure that no remnant of their order could survive to threaten his new empire. And so he sent his new apprentice, the former Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, now calling himself Darth Vader, to assault the Jedi Temple directly, to kill any Jedi who had survived Order 66 and found refuge there, to hunt down the archives and ensure nothing useful survived. Among the Jedi defending the temple was Jocasta Nu, the former chief librarian. She was old, no longer a warrior, if she ever had been, but she knew the temple's secrets better than almost anyone. As Vader cut through the temple, killing Jedi and taking control of the structure, Nu fled into the depth. She knew about the vault. She knew that if the Sith gained access to those artifacts, the consequences could be catastrophic. So she hid herself within that secret chamber, hoping to protect its contents, or at least to deny them to the enemy as long as possible. But Vader found her. Of course he found her. He was relentless in his hunt, empowered by the dark side and driven by rage at what he had lost and become. He confronted Nu in the vault itself, surrounded by the collected dark side artifacts of centuries. She had no chance against him. But before she died, Vader learned of the vault's existence, and he reported its contents to his master. Darth Sidious must have been delighted. Here was a treasure trove of forbidden knowledge, not Jedi wisdom, but Sith secrets that the Jedi had confiscated and stored, holocrons, weapons, and masks, including one particular mask that, when Sidious examined it, told him a story. The mask of Lord Momin had waited over 1,000 years for this moment, and when the Dark Lord of the Sith picked it up and examined it with Force-enhanced senses, Momin's consciousness reached out. It showed Sidious visions of its history. It told him about the Sith who had created art from suffering, the heretic who had built weapons to freeze time, the being whose philosophies had been too extreme even for other Sith. Sidious listened, learned, and recognized potential. Here was a Sith Lord whose approach to architecture and dark side manipulation could prove useful. The mask claimed that its creator had been an architect, capable of designing structures that channeled dark side power. Sidious had uses for such capability, and so, rather than simply storing the mask away again, he added it to his personal collection of Sith artifacts. Momin had achieved the first stage of resurrection. He had escaped the vault. He was back in the galaxy, held by a Sith Lord who understood his value. But Sidious was cautious. He knew the mask could possess those who wore it. He tested it carefully, using his formidable will to resist any attempt at control. Momin's spirit must have recognized that it could not dominate a Sith of Sidious's power. So instead of attempt his possession, the mask cooperated. It shared its knowledge, it told its stories, and it waited for an even better opportunity. Because Sidious, for all his power, was not the right vessel for what Momin wanted to achieve. He needed someone else, someone desperate, someone with access to a location strong in the dark side, someone who would be willing to let an ancient Sith help him build something. That someone was Darth Vader, and the opportunity came sooner than even Momin might have hoped. Discovery by the Empire. Years passed after the fall of the Jedi Order. The Republic became the Empire. Sidious transformed from senator to emperor, ruling absolutely over a galaxy he had manipulated into submission. Darth Vader served as his enforcer, hunting down surviving Jedi and crushing any resistance to Imperial rule. But beneath Vader's imposing armor and mask, beneath the mechanical breathing and the aura of dark side power, existed a man consumed by loss and self-hatred. Anakin Skywalker had turned to the dark side to save his wife, Padme, but his fall had directly led to her death. He had betrayed everything he believed in, murdered his friends and fellow Jedi, and embraced evil in exchange for a promise of power to prevent death. And he had lost what he sought to save. The woman he loved died because of him. This knowledge ate at him constantly. He served Sidious not out of loyalty or shared vision, but because he had nowhere else to go and nothing else left to lose. But the desire to resurrect Padme never truly left him. In his darkest meditations, in his private moments, Vader wondered if death could truly be conquered. If the dark side could grant immortality, as Sidious had sometimes suggested, could it also restore life? Could it bring back the dead? This question obsessed him, even as he knew it was probably futile. Death was permanent. What was gone could not return. Except Vader had seen impossible things achieved through the Force, and he could not let go of hope, poisonous and corrupting as it was. After years of service, Vader came to demand something from his master. He wanted a place of his own, a world where he could retreat from the galaxy, conduct his own research, explore the dark side without constant oversight from Sidious. This was a reasonable request for a Sith apprentice, and Sidious, recognizing that giving Vader something he wanted would strengthen his hold over him, agreed. He offered Vader the volcanic world of Mustafar as his personal stronghold. Mustafar, the planet where Anakin Skywalker had been destroyed, where Obi-Wan had defeated him, cut off his limbs, and left him burning by a lava flow, the place of Vader's greatest agony and his transformation into the mechanical monster he had become. For Sidious, this was psychological warfare, forcing Vader to return to the site of his trauma, ensuring that every moment spent there would remind him of his loss and failure. But Vader accepted. Perhaps he wanted to reclaim that place. Perhaps he sought to transform it from the site of his destruction into the seat of his power. Or perhaps he simply recognized that the planet's connection to his suffering had created a powerful dark side nexus, a convergence of force energy that he could use for his experiments. Vader traveled to Mustafar with Imperial architects and resources. He brought Colonel Alva Brenne, the Emperor's chief architect, and her aide, Lieutenant Rogo. He also brought the mask of Lord Momin, gifted to him by Sidious to aid in his studies of Sith history and architecture. The Emperor presented it as a tool for learning, a way for Vader to understand how ancient Sith lords had built their temples and strongholds. But both Sidious and Vader must have sensed that the mask was more than a simple teaching device. It held power, consciousness, intent. During the journey to Mustafar, the mask remained dormant. It did not attempt to possess Vader immediately. Perhaps it sensed his strength and knew that a direct assault would fail. Or perhaps it was simply observing, learning about this new Sith Lord, and determining the best approach to achieving its goals. But when they arrived on Mustafar and the Imperial architects began examining the planet for potential building sites, the mask began to act. Lieutenant Rogo was the first victim. He stayed behind with the mask while others explored the surface. Alone with the artifact, he found himself drawn to it. The mask called to him silently, through the Force or through some more subtle method of influence. He picked it up. He looked into those empty eye sockets, and the mask showed him visions. Momin's history unfolded in his mind. The early sculptures, the training under Lady Shah, the development of the superweapon, the destruction that failed to become art. And then, before Rogo could react or resist, the mask reached out and took control. Possession was not instantaneous or absolute. Rogo still existed within his own body, his consciousness pushed aside but not eliminated. But Momin's spirit now controlled the lieutenant's actions. Through Rogo's eyes, Momin saw Mustafar for the first time. He sensed the dark side nexus beneath the surface, created by Vader's suffering years earlier. He recognized immediately that this place was perfect for what he had always wanted to create. A structure that could channel dark side power, a building that would act as both monument and machine. Architecture as art, art as function. And at its core, the possibility of achieving what his failed superweapon had not, opening a door to the dark side itself. Through Rogo, Momin began to draw. His hands, using Rogo's body but guided by ancient understanding of Sith architecture, sketched designs for a fortress. Not a simple castle or temple, but something far more ambitious. A structure specifically designed to focus and channel the dark side energies that existed beneath Mustafar's surface. Towers positioned to act as tuning forks for Force energy. Chambers built to amplify dark side power, and at its heart, a mechanism that could tear through the barrier between the physical world and the realm of pure Force energy. A portal, a door to the dark side. When Vader found Rogo sketching these designs, he was immediately suspicious. The lieutenant had no training in architecture. How could he produce such complex and sophisticated plans? Vader confronted him, sensing something wrong. And in that confrontation, Momin revealed himself through Rogo's voice. He explained who he was, what he was, and what he could offer. Vader killed Rogo's body almost immediately, stabbing him with his lightsaber to end the possession. But the mask survived, falling to the ground amid the ashes of its host. Vader picked it up, understanding now what it was. Not merely an artifact of historical interest, but a prison containing the consciousness of an ancient Sith Lord. He should have destroyed it. But Vader wanted to understand. So he took the mask into the cave beneath the surface, to the nexus of dark side power that marked the place where Anakin had burned. In that cave, surrounded by concentrated dark side energy, the mask showed Vader everything. Momin's complete history unfolded in a vision more detailed than what Rogo had witnessed. Vader saw the young Momin creating his first sculpture from the Ratacat. He witnessed Lady Shah's training and Momin's murder of his master. He observed the creation of the Fermata cage and the design of the time-bending superweapon. He understood Momin's philosophy about art for the dark side itself, and he saw the failure, the Jedi intervention, the destruction of Momin's physical form. Through it all, Vader recognized something. Momin was obsessed, not with power or conquest, but with creation, with achieving a specific vision that he had failed to complete. And now, given another chance, with access to an unprecedented dark side nexus and the resources of the Empire behind him, Momin believed he could finally succeed. He could build his perfect structure, and if Vader allowed this, if he gave Momin the freedom to design and construct his fortress, the ancient Sith promised that the building would do more than just channel dark side power. It would open a door, a portal to the other side, a gateway through which the living could reach into death itself. And there, perhaps, Vader might find what he sought, the one he had lost, his wife, his reason for falling to darkness in the first place. Momin attempted to possess Vader directly during this vision, the mask trying to slip onto the Sith Lord's head and take control. But Vader resisted easily, his will and connection to the Force far too strong for even Momin's ancient consciousness to overcome. The attempt at possession failed, but it also demonstrated the mask's capabilities and intentions clearly. Momin was not simply offering knowledge. He wanted agency. He wanted to build again, and he was willing to work with Vader to achieve mutual goals. Vader made a pragmatic decision. He would use the mask, allow it to possess someone else, someone expendable, and let that possessed body design and oversee the construction of the fortress. If Momin's promises proved false, Vader would simply kill the host body and destroy the mask. But if the ancient Sith could truly create a structure that opened a door to the dark side, the potential reward was worth the risk. As Vader emerged from the cave, he encountered a group of Mustafarians, the native inhabitants of the planet. He killed several, but captured one alive, and with cold pragmatism, he forced the mask onto the Mustafarian's head. Momin's consciousness poured into this new host, and for the first time in over a millennium, the ancient Sith architect had hands to draw with and a voice to speak through. He stood on Mustafar's volcanic surface, looked up at the sky, and began planning how to build his masterpiece at last. Building Fortress Vader, the construction of what would become Fortress Vader was unlike any Imperial project undertaken before. This was not a military installation built according to standard procedures and regulations. It was not even a conventional Sith temple, following ancient designs passed down through generations. This was something unique, a structure that blurred the line between building and weapon, between architecture and alchemy, between the physical and the metaphysical. Momin designed it with centuries of accumulated knowledge and millennia of obsessive focus, and the Empire provided the resources to make his vision real. Using his Mustafarian host, Momin examined the dark side locus beneath the surface. The cave where Vader had been burned alive still resonated with his suffering. Years of pain and rage had soaked into the very stones. The force was strong there, stronger than almost anywhere else in the known galaxy. But strength alone was not enough. The energies needed to be focused, channeled, directed with precision toward a specific purpose. That was where the fortress came in. Momin's design called for a central tower built directly above the cave. This spire would act as the primary conduit, drawing power from the nexus and focusing it upward. Around this central structure, he positioned tuning towers, secondary spires carefully placed to resonate with the energy flow and amplify it. The mathematics involved were complex, drawn from Sith alchemy, a dark side philosophy, rather than conventional engineering. Every measurement mattered, every angle needed to be precise. The slightest deviation could disrupt the energy flow and render the entire structure useless. The fortress was to be built from obsidian, that volcanic glass that Mustafar produced in abundance. Not merely for aesthetic reasons, though the black stone did create an appropriately ominous appearance. Obsidian had properties that made it ideal for containing and channeling force energy. Its crystalline structure, formed when lava cooled rapidly, could be aligned to resonate with dark side power. Momin specified exactly how each block should be cut, how each section should be positioned, ensuring that the entire building would function as a single massive tuning fork for the darkness beneath it. Imperial construction crews worked under Momin's direction. These were soldiers and engineers, beings with no understanding of the Force or Sith alchemy. They simply followed the plans they were given, cut the stones as specified, assembled the structure according to the designs. They did not understand what they were building. They did not know that every rivet and support beam was part of a grand ritual, a prayer in stone to the dark side of the Force. They were tools, as the construction equipment was a tool, as the very materials were tools. All of it served Momin's vision. But construction on Mustafar was difficult under the best circumstances. The planet's volcanic nature made it hostile to life, and especially hostile to large-scale building projects. Lava flows constantly reshaped the landscape. Toxic gases filled the air. Heat radiated from every surface. And the very act of building on a dark side nexus had side effects. Each time construction reached a certain stage, each time the structure began to channel power, even in its incomplete state, massive disturbances rippled outward. Lava storms erupted across the planet. The ground shook. The native Mustafarian population, already barely surviving in the hellish environment, found their homes threatened by these unnatural disasters. The first fortress design took weeks or months to construct. Imperial resources were vast, allowing for rapid building despite the hostile conditions. As the structure neared completion, Momin prepared for the crucial test. Vader would channel the Force through the building, attempting to activate it and open the door to the dark side. If the design was successful, a portal would form. If not, they would need to try again. The first attempt failed catastrophically. As Vader channeled power into the structure, focusing the dark side energies of the locust through the obsidian tower, something went wrong. The resonance was incorrect. The tuning was off. Instead of opening a controlled portal, the fortress simply exploded. Force energy, no longer properly contained, erupted outward. The carefully constructed obsidian spire shattered. The tuning towers collapsed, months of work destroyed in seconds, and Vader, standing amid the destruction, was displeased. Momin's Mustafarian host tried to explain architecture of this precision was difficult. Working with force energies rather than conventional physics meant that calculations had to account for variables that no normal engineer would consider. The first design had been an experiment, a test to see how the energies would flow. Now, with data from that failure, he could design something better, something that would work. Vader, who was not known for his patience, allowed Momin to continue. The alternative was to give up on the possibility of opening a door to the dark side, and Vader was not willing to abandon that hope. So construction began again, a second fortress, incorporating lessons learned from the first failure, different angles for the tuning towers, modified proportions for the central spire, adjustments to how the obsidian blocks were arranged. It took less time than the first attempt, as the Imperial crews learned from experience and much of the foundation work remained intact. But when Vader attempted to activate this second design, it too failed. Different failure mode than the first, but still failure. The fortress exploded. Again, this pattern repeated. Third design, failure. Fourth design, failure. Fifth design, failure. With each attempt, Momin made adjustments, sometimes small tweaks to existing elements, sometimes major redesigns that required demolishing much of what had been built and starting over. The Imperial construction crews grew exhausted, resources were strained, and the repeated failures began to attract unwelcome attention. The Mustafarians, whose world was being torn apart by these experiments, began to organize resistance. After the fifth failure, which was accompanied by a particularly violent lava storm, massive swarms of lava fleas attacked the construction site. These native creatures, agitated by the force disturbances, descended on the Imperial garrison in numbers that overwhelmed defenses. The attack forced a complete halt to construction while the infestation was dealt with. Vader's patience, already thin, reached its limit. He killed Momin's Mustafarian host, executing him for the repeated failures. Then he forced the mask onto a stormtrooper, giving Momin a new body to work through. This second host lasted through the sixth, seventh, and eighth attempts. 3 more failures, 3 more fortresses built and destroyed, 3 more massive expenditures of Imperial resources that produced nothing but rubble. After the 8th failure, Vader killed this host as well and gave Momin his final body, an Imperial construction worker. Through this third host, Vader delivered his ultimatum. There would be a 9th attempt. It would be the last. If this design failed, if this fortress proved incapable of opening the door to the dark side, Vader would destroy the mask and Momin's consciousness with it. There would be no 10th attempt. This was the final chance. Momin accepted these terms. Perhaps he had no choice. Perhaps he believed he finally understood what had been wrong with the previous 8 designs. Or perhaps he simply had faith in his own abilities as an architect and in the dark side that had preserved him for so long. Either way, he began work on the 9th and final fortress design. This version was different from the others, not radically so to an outside observer, but to Momin, who had been refining his understanding of how the dark side nexus functioned and how the structure needed to channel its power. The differences were crucial. He had learned that using too many focusing spires made the energy uncontrollable, creating feedback loops that led to cascade failures. So this design simplified, fewer tuning towers, but positioned with absolute precision. A central spire that was taller and more massive than previous attempts, creating a stronger primary conduit for the power flow, and subtle modifications to how the obsidian blocks were fitted together, creating resonance patterns that earlier designs had lacked. Construction proceeded with desperate urgency. Everyone involved, from the imperial officers to the lowliest worker, understood that this was the final attempt. If this failed, the entire project would be abandoned, months of work would be wasted, and Vader's wrath would fall upon whoever he deemed responsible for the failure. So they worked with focus born of fear, following Momin's specifications exactly, double-checking every measurement, ensuring nothing was out of place. As the ninth fortress neared completion, the Mustafarian resistance prepared for one final assault. They had watched fortress after fortress rise and fall. They had endured the environmental catastrophes each failure created. They understood that another failure would bring another disaster upon their world. But they also recognized that if this fortress succeeded, if Vader managed to do whatever he was trying to do, the Empire would become permanently established on their world. This was their last chance to drive the invaders away. So they gathered their forces, united the tribes, and prepared to attack. The timing proved catastrophic for all involved. The ninth fortress was complete. Vader entered the structure and descended into the cave beneath it, ready to channel the Force and test whether this design would finally succeed. And just as he began to focus his power, just as the fortress began to hum with building energy, the Mustafarians attacked. The entire Imperial garrison found itself under assault. Lava mystics among the natives summoned waves of molten rock to wash over the soldiers. Warriors wielding primitive weapons but enhanced by native force techniques overwhelmed defensive positions. It was a coordinated assault of unprecedented scale. Vader felt the attack happening above him. His troopers were dying. His garrison was being overrun. Under normal circumstances, he would have abandoned what he was doing and gone to defend his forces. But he was so close. The fortress was working. He could feel the energies building, the power flowing through the structure exactly as designed. The door to the dark side was beginning to open. If he broke his concentration now, if he stopped channeling power, the moment would be lost. He would need to try again, assuming the fortress survived the Mustafarian assault intact. So, he made a decision. He continued focusing his power, trusting that his garrison could hold long enough for him to complete the activation. That decision gave Momin the opening he had been waiting for. Betrayal and resurrection. While Vader channeled power through the fortress, Momin stood nearby in his possessed construction worker body. He had told Vader that the Force was denied to him in this form, that he could only design and direct, but not actually use Force powers. This had been a lie, or perhaps more accurately, a misdirection. The possessed body had limitations, certainly, but Momin's consciousness, even separated from his original form, retained connection to the dark side. And with the fortress now active, with massive amounts of force energy flowing through its structure, he had access to more power than he had held since his death over a millennium ago. As Vader focused entirely on opening the portal, Momin acted. Using the construction worker's hands, he reached out through the Force and took control of the fortress's mechanisms. This was his design. Every aspect of it had been created according to his specifications. He understood its function better than anyone, even Vader, and he redirected its power. Instead of simply opening a door for Vader to look through, Momin used the portal for his own purpose. He reached through it across the barrier between life and death, and he pulled, not to bring something from the other side into the physical world, but to pull something from the other side back into the physical world. He pulled himself, his original body, his physical form that had been destroyed over 1,000 years earlier. The dark side preserved everything in its way. Death was not truly the end for those who served darkness with sufficient devotion. Momin's body had been vaporized in the explosion of his superweapon, but his essence remembered what he had been. The Force remembered, and with access to power of this magnitude, focused through a structure specifically designed to pierce the veil between worlds, he could restore what had been lost. The portal opened fully, not as the window Vader had hoped for, but as a gateway. And through that gateway stepped Momin in his original form, tall and slender, gray-skinned and long-haired, exactly as he had been in life. His scared face was hidden behind the mask he had created all those centuries ago. His curved hilt lightsabers appeared in his hands, called from across death by the sheer force of his will. After more than 1,000 years, trapped as a consciousness in a helmet, possessing other bodies and working through proxies, Darth Momin walked Mustafar's surface in his own flesh once more. The possessed construction worker body, no longer needed, approached the resurrected Momin. The mask split, part of it still worn by the worker and part of it materializing on Momin's true face. The consciousness that had been divided between the artifact and the host body reunified. Momin was whole again, alive again, resurrected through the power of the dark side and his own architectural genius. He had achieved what few Sith had ever managed, true return from death. Not as a spirit or a Force ghost, but as a living being with physical form and full command of his powers. This was the betrayal. Vader had trusted Momin to build a fortress that would allow him to contact Padme. Instead, Momin had built a fortress that served his own purposes. The door opened, yes, but not for Vader's use, for Momin's resurrection. The ancient Sith had lied about his limitations, manipulated events to his advantage, and exploited Vader's desperate hope to achieve his own goals. It was, in its way, perfectly in keeping with Sith philosophy. The strong take what they want. The cunning survive through deception. Momin had simply been strong and cunning enough to use a Sith Lord as a tool, but Momin made a critical error. He underestimated Darth Vader. Vader, still deep in the cave, felt the betrayal immediately. The fortress that should have opened a door for him had instead brought back an ancient Sith. His resources had been used, his hope had been manipulated, and above him, his garrison was being slaughtered by Mustafarians while he wasted time and effort on a plan that had never been intended to benefit him. The rage that filled Vader in that moment was absolute. This anger, built on top of the existing fury that defined his existence, eclipsed even his typical dark side emotions. He abandoned the cave and the portal. He rose to the surface and saw the situation clearly. The Mustafarian assault was overwhelming his forces. Stormtroopers lay dead and dying by the dozens. His officers had fallen. The natives, empowered by religious fervor and desperation, had nearly destroyed the entire garrison. For any normal commander, this would have been a catastrophic defeat. For Vader, it was an opportunity to unleash his full power without restraint. He used the fortress. The structure that Momin had built to channel dark side power still functioned. Vader plugged himself into it, becoming the conduit that the architecture had been designed to facilitate. And through it, he unleashed destruction on a scale the Mustafarians could never have imagined. Force energy, drawn from the nexus below and amplified by the fortress, erupted across the battlefield. Lava mystics attempted to summon molten rock, found their own technique turned against them. The ground itself opened, swallowing warriors by the score. Heat that would have killed any unprotected being washed over the battlefield, and Vader stood at its center untouched. The Mustafarian assault broke. Those who could fled, those who could not died. Vader annihilated the attacking force, leaving only corpses and burning rock behind. He had lost his entire garrison, yes. Every stormtrooper and officer who had accompanied him to Mustafar was dead. But the natives who had presumed to attack an Imperial stronghold had been exterminated. The threat was eliminated, and Vader was left alone with Momin in a fortress surrounded by corpses. The confrontation between them was inevitable. Momin had been preparing for it, understanding that Vader would eventually realize the betrayal and seek revenge. The ancient Sith had seen the visions in the portal. He knew Vader's history. He understood the full extent of Anakin Skywalker's fall and transformation, and he believed, in his arrogance, that he could defeat this broken man in his mechanical suit. They met in the chamber beneath the fortress, beside the portal that still glowed with dark side energy. Momin spoke first, taunting Vader with the truth. The door to the dark side would never accept someone like Vader. The dark side loved Momin, had preserved him, and allowed his resurrection. But Vader, he was a tool of Sidious, a slave to his rage, a being who had traded everything for power and received only loss in return. The dark side did not love Vader. It used him, and when he was no longer useful, it would discard him. Vader responded not with words, but with action. His red lightsaber ignited. Momin's twin blades answered, both Sith Lords ready for combat. The duel that followed was brief but intense. Momin was a skilled duelist. He had learned from Lady Shah, one of the finest warriors of his era. His technique was refined, his movements precise, his blade work exceptional, and he had the advantage of fighting in a body that was fully his own, unencumbered by injury or mechanical augmentation. Against most opponents, he would have been nearly unbeatable, but Vader was not most opponents. He was a being of concentrated rage and dark side power. His dueling technique, trained by the Jedi and then corrupted by the Sith, was among the finest in the galaxy. His physical limitations from his injuries and suit were overcome by sheer force-enhanced strength and augmentation, and most critically, he was fighting with the absolute fury of someone who had been betrayed, manipulated, and denied what he desperately sought. The duel was decidedly one-sided. Momin's precision could not match Vader's raw power. His technique was beautiful, but ultimately ineffective against someone who simply overpowered every defense. Vader battered through Momin's guard, his heavy strikes crashing against the ancient Sith's lighter blades. One of Momin's lightsabers was knocked aside, then the other, and then Vader's blade came down and severed Momin's sword arm at the elbow. The ancient Sith fell to his knees, his resurrection lasting mere minutes. He looked up at Vader, perhaps about to speak, perhaps about to plead or curse or philosophize, but Vader gave him no opportunity. Using the Force with brutal efficiency, Vader seized a massive stone slab and hurled it at Momin. The ancient Sith was crushed against the wall, pinned by tons of rock. His body, so recently restored, was destroyed again. But this time was different. This time, there was no mask to preserve his consciousness. The helmet had been damaged in the duel, its dark side matrix disrupted. Momin's spirit had nowhere to flee. Darth Momin died for the second and final time. His consciousness, freed from the broken mask, dissipated into the Force. His dream of creating eternal monuments to suffering ended unfulfilled. His artistry, so extreme that it horrified even other Sith, would produce no more works. He had been resurrected only to be destroyed again, this time with no hope of return. The galaxy was finally free of the heretic architect, but the story of Momin did not entirely end with his death. The fortress he had designed stood intact, and with Momin gone, Vader finally had the opportunity to use it as originally intended. He descended once more into the cave. He channeled power through the structure, and the portal opened, not to resurrect the dead, as Momin had done, but to allow the living to look beyond the veil. Vader's consciousness passed through. He found himself in a realm outside normal reality, a space where the Force manifested directly. And there, he searched for Padme. He saw visions of his life. He confronted manifestations of Jedi he had killed. He battled phantoms and illusions, and finally, he found her, or thought he did. A figure that looked like Padme stood before him on a balcony in an impossible reconstruction of the Jedi Temple. He reached for her, believing that somehow, impossibly, he could bring her back, that the portal could restore what had been lost. But it was a lie, a manifestation created by the dark side, showing Vader what he wanted to see. When he tried to take Padme's hand, she stepped backward off the balcony and fell, dissolving as she plummeted. The vision shattered. The truth became inescapable. Padme was gone, not just dead, but truly gone, beyond the reach of even the most powerful dark side techniques. No portal could bring her back. No fortress, no matter how well designed, could undo what had been done. A beam of light struck Vader then. Some manifestation of the Force itself, perhaps, or simply his own realization made manifest in that strange realm. He was expelled from the portal, his consciousness returning to his body in the cave beneath the fortress. He stood there, alone, surrounded by the bodies of his garrison and the remnants of the Mustafarian assault. His search had failed. His hope had been manipulated, and he remained exactly what he had been: Darth Vader, slave to Sidious, prisoner of his own choices, forever denied the one thing he truly wanted. In his fury at this final disappointment, Vader used the fortress one last time. He channeled all his rage and power through its structure and directed that energy at the portal itself. The gateway to the dark side collapsed, sealing shut with catastrophic violence. The explosion of Force energy that resulted destroyed much of the fortress's interior. The tuning towers cracked, the central spire developed fissures, but the basic structure survived, if badly damaged. Vader had his stronghold. It simply had not given him what he sought. He contacted Sidious and reported that he was returning to Coruscant. The fortress was built, though not without complications. He said nothing about Momin's resurrection and subsequent death. He did not mention the portal or what he had seen beyond it. He simply acknowledged that his experiment on Mustafar had produced results, some expected and some not. And Sidious, who almost certainly understood far more than Vader told him, accepted this report. The mask of Lord Momin, damaged and broken, was returned to the Emperor. Though the spirit within had been destroyed, the artifact itself retained some power. Sidious added it back to his collection, perhaps believing it might still have some use. The mask would surface again briefly, causing corruption and death when it came into contact with those too weak to resist its lingering dark side energies. But without Momin's consciousness directing it, the mask was just another dangerous artifact. Powerful, yes, but no longer intelligent, no longer scheming, just a reminder of a Sith Lord who had nearly succeeded in his ultimate goal. Legacy and conclusion. The death of Darth Momin marked the end of his personal story, but his influence continued to affect the galaxy for decades after his destruction. The fortress he designed would become one of the most iconic symbols of Darth Vader's power and the Empire's dark majesty. Fortress Vader, as it came to be known, stood on Mustafar for years, a monument to suffering and loss, built on a site of terrible pain, designed by a heretic Sith who believed architecture could be art and art could be weapon. The fortress served as Vader's private sanctum. He would retreat there between missions for the Emperor, using its medical facilities and Bacta tanks to maintain his damaged body. The castle contained everything necessary for his survival: life support systems, meditation chambers, archives of Sith knowledge. It was also where Vader came to be alone with his thoughts and his loss, the one place in the galaxy where he could remove his mask briefly and try to find some measure of peace, though peace always eluded him. But the fortress was more than just Vader's residence. It became a place of dark power in its own right. The combination of the natural dark side nexus, the centuries of Sith experimentation that Momin had conducted, and Vader's own connection to his suffering created a concentration of dark side energy unlike almost anywhere else in the galaxy. Force-sensitive beings who came near the fortress reported feeling overwhelming despair and rage. The very stones seemed to pulse with malevolent power. Momin's death in the fortress also created lasting effects. When Vader killed him and his consciousness finally dissipated, the violence of that death and the massive amount of dark side energy present created a force nexus specifically tied to Momin's demise. This nexus manifested as visions and echoes, phantoms that would appear to visitors in the caves beneath the castle. These were not true hauntings in any conventional sense. They were impressions left in the Force, fragments of memory and emotion that replayed for those who stumbled into the areas where they were strongest. Years later, between the destruction of the first Death Star and the Battle of Endor, a group known as the Knights of Ren visited Fortress Vader on a mission for the crime syndicate Crimson Dawn. They entered the caves beneath the castle, seeking an artifact called the Screaming Key. In those dark passages, they encountered a vision of Momin. His severed head lay on the ground, the mask's eyes glowing with residual power. One of the knights, a woman named Basra, panicked and fired her blaster at the illusion. The vision dissolved into ash, revealing it for what it was, just a phantom, an echo of something long dead. This encounter demonstrated that even in death, even with his consciousness fully destroyed, Momin's presence lingered in the places he had touched. The fortress itself was a monument to his dark architectural genius. The caves remembered his death, and the galaxy, though it did not know his name, was shaped by his actions. Meanwhile, one of Momin's other creations continued to cause problems. The fermata cage, that device capable of imprisoning beings or places outside the flow of time, had survived the centuries. The ancient Sith had used it to trap particularly dangerous enemies, including a sentient droid virus known as the Scourge. When Lady Kira of Crimson Dawn discovered the fermata cage, she recognized its potential as a weapon against the Empire. She used it in an attempt to trap both Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader, removing them from the timeline permanently and hopefully breaking the Empire's power structure. Her plan nearly succeeded. Using knowledge passed down from Darth Maul, who had his own reasons for wanting revenge against Sidious, Kira activated the cage while both Sith Lords were present. The device began to function exactly as designed, its miniature black holes warping space-time and beginning to pull the Emperor and Vader outside the normal flow of time. For a moment, it seemed that Momin's creation would achieve what direct force had failed to accomplish: the removal of the galaxy's most powerful Sith Lords. But the Knights of Ren, who had been working with Crimson Dawn, betrayed Kira at the crucial moment. They freed Palpatine and Vader from the cage's influence, setting up their own eventual service to Kylo Ren and the First Order decades later. The attempt failed. The Sith Lords survived, but the fact that the fermata cage nearly succeeded demonstrated the enduring danger of Momin's innovations. His weapons, his techniques, his approach to the dark side, all of it remained potent centuries after his death. The legacy of Darth Momin forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of the Sith and the dark side of the Force. Most Sith Lords sought power for understandable, if evil, reasons. They wanted to rule, they wanted revenge, they wanted to survive and dominate. Their goals, while terrible, were at least comprehensible in human terms. But Momin wanted something stranger and more disturbing. He wanted to create monuments to suffering that would exist forever. He wanted to freeze people in their moments of worst terror and preserve them as art. His philosophy was so extreme that even other Sith rejected it. And yet, in rejecting Momin, the Sith also acknowledged a limitation of their own philosophy. If the dark side is truly about passion, about refusing to accept limits, about transforming the galaxy through will and power, then why should there be boundaries? Why should any approach to the dark side be too extreme? Momin asked these questions through his actions. He pushed boundaries that other Sith would not cross. And for this, he was deemed a heretic and erased from history. But erasure did not eliminate his influence. His fortress stood for decades. His fermata cage threatened the most powerful Sith Lords of the modern era. His mask corrupted and killed for generations after his death. His ideas, though suppressed, persisted in the dark corners of Sith lore. And perhaps most significantly, his story demonstrated that the dark side offered paths beyond the traditional Sith obsessions with conquest and revenge. There were other ways to serve darkness, other forms of power to pursue, other nightmares to birth into reality. The galaxy is vast and full of stories. Some are about heroes who rise to defend the innocent. Some are about villains who seek to dominate and destroy. But the story of Darth Momin is neither of these familiar narratives. It is about an artist who found beauty in horror and chose to serve the dark side not as a warrior or a conqueror, but as a creator of eternal nightmares. His masterpiece was never completed. His vision was never fully realized. But the attempt alone was enough to mark him as one of the most disturbing figures in the long history of the Sith Order. Fortress Vader eventually fell to ruin. The Empire collapsed. Vader died, redeemed as Anakin Skywalker in his final moments. The Sith were seemingly destroyed once and for all with the death of Palpatine, though even that proved temporary. The galaxy moved on as it always does, leaving behind the monuments and mistakes of previous generations. But in the ruins on Mustafar, in the caves beneath the volcanic surface, in the broken stones of the fortress designed by a mad heretic, Momin's influence remained, a reminder that the dark side takes many forms and that sometimes the most terrifying evil comes not from those who seek to destroy, but from those who seek to create. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the complete story of Darth Momin. If you enjoyed learning about this fascinating and disturbing figure from Star Wars lore, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are countless more Sith Lords and dark side practitioners whose stories deserve to be told, each bringing their own unique brand of horror and fascination to the galaxy, far, far away. May the dark side be with you always. Sleep well